Hello, we are back with Chapter 5, Section 3 notes. Chapter 5, Section 3 is about the powers of Congress, and that powers of Congress section begins on page 143 of our textbook. So that is all about, of course, congressional powers. What does Congress actually have the power to do? Can the House and the Senate pass any law about anything? How does that work? So, Chapter 5, Section 3 discusses two main kinds of congressional power. Basically, it says anything Congress can do, any bill Congress can pass into a law, is either a delegated power or, to scroll down, an implied power. So if Article 1 sets out our legislative branch, and the legislative branch's main job is to pass laws, well, gee, what kind of laws can it pass? So those two main kinds, delegated or implied. And delegated simply means it is specifically listed in the Constitution in specific words. These are things Congress has the power to do. So in Article 1, which discusses and establishes the legislative branch of our government in our Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, there is a list of all the things specifically delegated, listed, written out that Congress can do. So the first of those is financing government. The Constitution specifically says Congress has the ability to raise money, called taxes, of course, to turn around and spend those tax dollars on actually running a government. It has some other powers besides that, though, regulating and encouraging American trade and industry. So, both between the states and with other foreign countries, Congress has a role in passing laws that can say things like if a foreign country is selling goods inside the United States, the US government can say, we want to make sure that whatever Canada is selling into the United States isn't poison and would kill us all. And so Congress could pass a law making sure, checking the goods at the border, for example, to make sure they're not poisonous. Defending the country is, of course, one of the key things that Congress does, and the Constitution says it needs to do. So if it taxes us and takes our money, one of the first most important things it should do is protect us by spending that money, and it does by creating an army, and now an Air Force and the Marines, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. We need a court system, and the courts do not get to create themselves. So Congress, as one of its delegated powers, is allowed to create lower courts. So the Supreme Court is created through the Constitution, and then all of the other court systems is created through Congress. Those courts need money. The judges have to get paid. The courthouses have to be built. And all of those things have to happen by legislative action, by laws. So Congress has that power, which is, of course, a check over the judicial branch. If you remember back talking about separation of powers and checks and balances. And then lastly, the text discusses providing for growth. Congress can pass laws to regulate immigration or naturalization, governing the country's territories, allowing in new states. Those are all specifically listed in the Constitution as part of Congress's delegated powers. So those delegated powers are listed in the Constitution. The other kind of power Congress has is implied powers, or are implied powers. And implied means that even though that's not specifically in the Constitution, Congress, in order to carry out its job of doing all of those other delegated powers in part, certainly has more powers than just what's listed there. And so those are called implied powers. And part of the Constitution says that Congress can pass anything necessary and proper, has that term or clause, the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, to carry out its duties. Because that is defined, or has come to be defined very broadly. What is necessary and proper? Well, lots of stuff Congress has decided and courts have allowed. That's become called the elastic clause because it's stretchy, like elastic or rubber band, like it's very large. Congress can do lots of things have become defined as necessary and proper for Congress to do. Besides, though, just delegated and implied powers, Congress does have some other roles, and the one specifically laid out in the Constitution is the impeachment power. And to impeach someone means literally just to accuse an office holder of misconduct. And it does not have to be the president. Judges and other officials in the government can be impeached by Congress. So if a justice on the US Supreme Court or the vice president or someone else in government in a high up role has been accused of a crime, Congress can impeach them, which says, we think you did something wrong. Not that you're guilty, but we think you did something wrong. And the House of Representatives is the only part of our government that has the right to impeach a president or other high officials in the US government. Once they're impeached in the House, then that would move to the US Senate. And the Senate then acts like a jury in a trial, and the Senate actually votes guilty or not guilty on the impeachment charges. So impeachment was very rarely used in American history, for presidents anyway, and not very often for anyone else either. But in presidential terms, only Andrew Johnson, way back after the Civil War in the 1860s, was impeached by the House and found not guilty by the Senate up until the 1990s. And then since 1996 or 7 or so, 1999, two presidents have been impeached. Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat, was impeached in 1999, and then Donald Trump was impeached by the U.S. House in his first term in office. And both of those, Clinton and Trump, had trials in the Senate. The impeachment said, we think you did something wrong, have a trial. And then in that trial, in both of their cases, as well as Andrew Johnson's, they were all found not guilty, and so remained stayed as president. The other vocabulary term that's used is treason in Chapter 5, Section 3. And treason is simply a word that means an act that betrays or endangers one's country. That is an impeachable offense. What special powers are granted in the Constitution to our lawmaking bodies, to the House and the Senate? Well, the Senate in particular has some special roles to play. The Senate has 4 special powers: impeachment trials. All the trial itself is always held in the Senate. They can play a role in the selection of the vice president, basically in the event of a tie almost, whereas the House has that special power for the president. But the bigger and more important issues that actually come to play a lot, all treaties with foreign nations have to be approved by the Senate with a 2/3 vote. So if we have 100 senators, 67 or 2/3 of those senators, if all are present, must approve that treaty for it to pass. And certain high officials like Supreme Court justices that the president appoints to serve in his cabinet, for example, or on the Supreme Court or some other officials, those must also be approved by the US Senate, although by only a majority vote, so 51 votes, if all 100 senators are present. But so those two confirmation and ratification roles of officials and treaties are a very important job that the Senate has, and listed specifically in the Constitution that the House does not have. So are there any limits on congressional power? There absolutely are. So Article 1 that we just talked about actually lists some things Congress cannot do specifically. And then there's also sort of an elastic clause of you can't do anything else either, sort of the opposite of the necessary and proper clause, which is in the Constitution. There are lots of cross-cutting currents, as political scientists would say, within our Constitution. Lots of things that seem like they're opposite, but the founders and framers of our Constitution certainly purposefully did some of those things, again, to limit any one part of our government from becoming too powerful. Anyway, some of those limits specifically listed on congressional power are at the very end of Chapter 5, Section 3 here. So Congress cannot pass an ex post facto law, fancy Latin word that simply means, or term, laws that apply to actions that occurred before the laws were passed. So, for example, if Congress said eating ice cream is illegal starting now, or passed a law that just said eating ice cream is illegal, and then they can go prove that I ate ice cream 3 weeks ago before they passed the law, well, they can't get me in trouble for it. Because when I ate that ice cream 3 weeks ago, it was still legal to enjoy my Rocky Road or mint chocolate chip. And it wasn't illegal until they passed that law 3 weeks later. So if I eat ice cream after they pass that law, I can get in trouble, subject to judicial review. But anyway, if they can't pass a law and then punish me for it, a crime that I committed before it was ever a law. That's ex post facto. So the rest of these you should read. So bills of attainder, they can't pass a law sending people to prison without actually charging them with a crime. Habeas corpus, is an important idea that there must be enough evidence to actually charge you with a crime before they can even hold you for a trial. Congress is not allowed to tax our exports. They can't pass laws that violate any part of the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights, of course, says we have, for example, among other things, the freedom of speech. Congress could not pass a law that says I could not make fun of President Trump or President Clinton or whatever, right? You can't pass a law violating the freedom of speech. That's a real limit, of course, on congressional power. You can't withdraw money without a law. Congress is not allowed, specifically listed in the Constitution, to grant titles of nobility. They could not make me a prince or a duke or an earl, as much as I might deserve it. And then more broadly, the 10th Amendment just simply reserves almost all other powers not mentioned to the states or the people. And so there are some limits to congressional power and basically what it can vote on as a bill to make a law. So that concludes Chapter 5, Section 3. Thanks again for watching and your time and attention. And we'll conclude Chapter 5, the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, next time.